Welcome, everybody. What is the name of this class? Living Without Power. Yeah. Okay. That's the right one. You guys are in the right place. My name's Jake Smith. I'm from the 3rd Ward, and I've got a passion for this stuff, and I'm going to get into that a little bit. And Robert's the only one. This is kind of my repentance tour. I only got about halfway through my information in the last class. So I'm going to do better. You guys get a better, more polished version. I will save some of the stories and some of the cool show and tell items for the end if there's some extra time, but I want to get through my agenda. Robert, I'm going to have to look to you this time to keep me. If I'm veering off talking about like brain scanning foxes and stuff, it's time to bring me back to power. Sound good? Okay. Can you guys hear me okay back there, Jake? Okay. A lot better than last time. Okay. What is the end of the world? Can somebody tell me? This isn't meant to be one of those scary conversations. What's the end of the world?
When you die.
When you die? Or we think about, really we don't have to worry about the end of the world, right? Because if that happens, we don't have to worry. What's the end of the world as we know it? That last little bit is important. What the end of the world as we know it is what? Think about what the name of this class is. Electricity. That is the end of the world as we know it. We live in the age, the information, the technology age, and it is all dependent on electricity, right? Our whole entire grid, everything we have set up, our infrastructure is really dependent on electricity. So I want to ask you guys, what items do you have that are wants that you enjoy using electricity for, and what items do you think are needs that you need electricity for? Real, I'm not looking for anything, I'm just wondering.
Power.
You need power for what? Light?
Heat. Light.
Heat? That's an important one, right?
I need it for air.
Boom, you're getting closer to what I actually am steering at. What other things do you need?
Warm shower.
Oh, a warm shower. That's right. I've been doing the whole cold thing. I don't dare jump in cold water yet, so I just turn my shower to really cold. And it's horrible. It's supposed to make my dopamines do cool stuff, but I don't get it. Anyway, maybe one of you, if you've done it. Huh?
For your heat, you need the electricity to heat your home.
Yep, that's a huge one.
Cooking food.
Cooking, yep.
Refrigeration.
That's a huge one. That's a massive one. Okay. Were those needs or are those wants?
Needs.
Needs. Do you think that you could do those things without electricity?
Yes.
Some of them.
Definitely. But a lot harder now than it was 100 years ago, right? Because they didn't have electricity. So I wanted to get into some of those needs and how we could fulfill those needs using stuff that we have or that you could have at home. But I hope that you're thinking about those things a little bit, right? That's the whole point of this conversation, is to try to help spur in your mind like, oh, if the power goes out, I better have a way to charge my thing. And I didn't get to it, but for me, medical stuff is about the only thing that, like, without electricity, we could be in big trouble, right? There's certain medications for insulin and a few others that are temperature sensitive, and that if you don't have it, that insulin's gonna go, if you don't have it cooled, that medication can go bad, right? So that's a big one. So for me, if my child was diabetic, I'd be thinking about how would I keep his medication cold if I didn't have any power. Does that make sense? That's a big one. So, okay, let me tell you a little bit about me, and I'm gonna keep it better than I did last time. When they told me I only had 10 minutes left, I about died because, I don't know. Presenting, you kind of lose track of time a little bit. But I became interested in kind of this whole living without power when I was really little. My dad ran survival programs for Nebo School District. My dad's name is Greg Smith. If any of you know him, he taught up at the high school for a long time. Did any of you go on a survival in Nebo School District? They call it a survival, but it was like a 6-day backpacking trip where you didn't have
I had
rent.
siblings that did.
You did.
I didn't do it myself, but I had siblings.
Do you know what years that was by chance?
They were in the 90s.
Okay, so that was when it was an official program. So at some point, a kid died in the Nebo backpacking survival program. He would have died if he was home. It was a medical issue, it was a sudden thing, like they thought he was perfectly healthy, his heart stopped. But Nebo School District said, I'm not doing that anymore, that was scary. And so my dad's like, well, that was really cool, because he has a minor in psychology, and that's why they were taking kids out. He's like, I'm gonna keep doing that. And so he kept, every summer, he would just talk to the kids in his class and say, do any of you wanna go? And he would just take them backpacking into the wilderness. Like, I don't even know where he came up with that, because he was a major sports guy, I don't know how, but he loved it. And it was my very first job. So when I was growing up, he would pay me to help drive and help facilitate these trips. In fact, we'd be out there, and I had to do all the water filtration for the group. Now I'd be like, they need to filter their own so they get the experience. But he was like, no, you're being paid to be out here. Go and use the filter. And I got so tired of using that filter that I began just to drink straight from the river. And I think that's what kept me from getting sick when I lived in Mexico, personally. But anyway, make sure you filter your water. I'm not saying don't filter your water, okay? But also, I cut myself out there. This is why I'm interested in medical things and why I love learning about wilderness and preparedness stuff. But I cut my arm really bad, and in my head I thought, what would the Native Americans do? Oh, they'd stitch themselves up. I knew nothing, like I didn't know anything. And I found some fishing line, and I used a little safety pin and poked holes in my arm and fished the line through. And I didn't even, has anybody had stitches in here? Yeah, generally they're individual knots, right, to hold your skin together. I didn't know that. I was trying to sew like I'd been taught to sew my pants up. So I did this whole running stitch, pulled it tight, and tried to tie it like a shoelace. And my dad saw it and was like, get that out of your arm right now. And I thought it was so cool. The girls were gonna be so impressed, and everybody was like, you're a freak. But I had to go to the doctor, and I did have an infection. He's like, you probably would have lost your arm if you didn't come in. So I wouldn't recommend doing that either. But it did put me on a pathway of curiosity of how should I have done it. And I learned and loved wilderness medicine as well. So the major story that I have to share, when I was on my mission, I lived through a hurricane. So Hurricane Isadora came through, it was gonna hit Cancun. And so I was in the office in the capital city, far, far away, and we got the elders and everybody ready on the coast. When this hurricane hit, our elders were gonna be safe. Well, that hurricane kind of veered off and went between Cuba and the Yucatan Peninsula, hit the Gulf of Mexico, and usually it picks up speed right there and slams into the United States. This time, it spun around, came back, and hit Merida, and we were not ready. Nobody was ready, because we didn't expect it. So it came back, hit us, and it sat on top of us for 24 hours. It didn't keep moving. It moved around the city. We walked outside twice when we were in the eye of the storm, and it was like totally calm, and it was just devastation. I mean, it looked like we'd been bombed. I mean, trees down everywhere. I mean, these trees aren't like the coastal trees that are used to getting heavy winds and everything, and it was gnarly. All the power lines were down, everything. And we lived without power for 2 months, so we didn't have anything. What else do you think we needed during that time, other than power, to stay alive? Water, food, right? So, water, we have big tanks on top of the houses down there called tinajas, and they just hold a lot of water. So we were lucky to have that to drink from. We didn't have anything extra for showers, let alone warm showers. We did have a gross pond out back that I think was somebody's like ankle-deep swimming pool at some point that we used to throw things in, and it was just gross. We used that to kind of try to flush our toilets until that didn't work when everything broke down, and so when you flushed it didn't go anywhere, and so we had to figure out what to do with our waste. It was a scary situation, and this city that I like to liken to, it's like San Francisco of Mexico. A lot of arts, a lot of colleges. It was a full-on city. It descended into chaos within a few days, and it was scary. You know, people were hurting each other for water, for gasoline, for whatever they could to take care of their families. And us as elders, we were woefully unprepared for anything like that. Like, we didn't have food storage, you know, we go to the Cocinetta's house and she cooks for us every day, you know. So, anyway, we had the next road over, there was a tortilleria, place that made beautiful tortillas, right? And they had a whole bunch of their masa, which is the stuff that they make tortillas out of. And they, bless you, and they stopped selling their stuff, and they began to give it to anybody for free that needed food. And all these tortillerias, I don't know if they got together to say, let's do this, but they were pretty much, after the first few days, they were, because you went and bought your food for the day. It was a normal, you go down to the market, you buy fresh meat for the day. There wasn't a ton of refrigeration there, but there was no food after the first 3 or 4 days. So we ate peanut butter and tortillas for breakfast, tortillas and ketchup for lunch, and tortillas and cheese spread for dinner, and then intermix those flavors to see what we could come up with. You know, we got pretty inventive. But it was a kind of a scary situation. We watched a man killed. They didn't allow us to move in groups smaller than 4 while we were there, because people would take things. And the group of men that we saw actually attacking someone with a machete was because the man had stolen from their family, and they were protecting their stuff. And so it had descended, and nobody showed up to stop these guys with machetes, and it was like, wow, this is a scary situation, right? Well, it wasn't too long, it was probably 2 weeks, and the church, the stake president and the mission president called in food storage. They said, if you have food storage and you'd be willing to share, come and bring it to the stake center, and we're gonna share with people that are in need. We need help. And it was amazing to see the amounts. And I remember some of the people were like, I'm not sharing what I have. They weren't prepared beforehand. But by and large, people brought. And they wanted to be known at least we have something to share with others. And so that they kept and I didn't finish this story, I realized last time. They kept close records of who brought, who took, and how much, and all of that stuff. And it was probably another week. The mission president pulled all of us in and said, we're all gonna go hit the airport. We're gonna clear the runway so that the planes can begin to arrive, because trucks couldn't get into the city because of the devastation. So we cleared the airport, got all the trees and the power lines and all the stuff off, and within 2 hours the planes started to land. Red Cross planes filled with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints stuff. We had no idea that it was going to be, I should have realized, but I didn't know. When we started to unload it, and it was from Salt Lake, packets of clothing from DI, I'm like, I can almost smell home, right? And we offloaded that, and that was brought to the stake center as well. And when it was all said and done, the people that brought their food storage ended up with about 4 times as much food as what they'd brought. So they were the first to be able to take from what was left over after the emergency was done. And it was a really neat, it was a cool thing to see. But that changed in my mind my whole degree. I was going into history, I wanted to teach history as a professor at a college. After that, I was like, I want to be involved with whatever that was. That was amazing. And I changed my degree to emergency management when I got home. One last little bit of the story I just wanted to share that was a really beautiful thing. There was no power. There was lights. Everybody's batteries had gone out by that time. People had raided the Costco's. There was nothing left. There was very little electronic light anywhere. But every night, the temple, they would light up the temple with the generators for 1 hour. And they would hit that building, and that, if it's dark, imagine those lights shining straight up into the sky, and it would bring hundreds of people. They would come every night and just stand there to be by the light, right? And for months and months afterwards, we would have people saying, are you the church that has the light? And we were like, yeah, And it was a cool way to share. It was a beautiful thing to be a part of. It was hard at the time, but like most things that are hard, it was worth it. but it changed my whole view. I watched a city go from, you know, a regular big city to a primitive living situation where people were hurting each other. And so I came home and I was very interested in that. While I went to school for that, I decided to find a job that was more in line with that and my interests. I was working as a teller at the family business at Central Bank, and I had a fellow teller that was like, hey, come and work with me and we're gonna take care of kids that are in trouble, and you have to give them meds at night. And I was like, that doesn't sound fun. No, I'm out. Later, I had a different friend who took me to, we were at a concert, and he's like, I know you love to backpack, don't you? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, do you want to get paid to go backpacking? And I'm like, sign me up. And when I went to go do the interview, the person doing the interviewing was my teller friend. And she's like, oh, you do want to work here. And I'm like, wait, this is the same thing? So I didn't know what it was, but wilderness therapy is where you go out and you work with youth that have gotten in trouble. And you take them, we started them on a ranch, and then they transitioned out into the wilderness and had, you know, some time out there, and then would come back to the ranch. And it was a really neat experience. I got to learn a lot of primitive living skills and survival skills. This is where I really went wrong in the last class. So over there, I've got a whole bunch of show and tell stuff about primitive skills, but I'm not really here to talk about primitive skills. So if we have time at the end, I'll show you and talk about some of that stuff. But I won't do it in the middle of this class so that we can get through the material. But a lot of that cool stuff that you learn or have seen, like starting fires with sticks and all of that, we practiced and did a lot. And I liked it because when I was in Mexico, we didn't have any electricity, and I started to learn how to do without it. What can we do without electricity, right? And so, ultimately, this is kind of my intro and why I love this stuff. But I worked with troubled teens a lot, and I was in the field a lot. I was the risk manager. I'd go out if there was any issues. I was the field director, so I'd go out for a week at a time. And my wife very lovingly came to me one day and was like, she handed me a calendar, and she said, I just want you to see, I kept track last year of all the days you were gone, and totaled together, it was 1 week shy of 6 months of me not being in the home, which was shocking, because they're usually 2 days at a time, 3 days, and then there's a conference, and then, oh, there's an emergency, and I felt really important to need to go and take care of emergencies. And then she did the final nail in the coffin and said, you're raising everybody else's kids but your own. And that got me, and it got me good. And so I quit and became an electrician. No, I left there and I went over to my friend who was running an electrical company, and that's where I've been ever since. And I felt kind of like a traitor, like I'm giving up all this cool primitive and wilderness stuff to go to the opposite end of the spectrum and deal with electricity. But really, it's really come together in a very neat way, you know? So I've got two basic ideas on this. As you prepare to go without. Okay, two paths of learning how to deal with electrical problems. One, learn how to get along without it. And we're going to go through a bunch of this stuff, how to go without. Two, learn how to make your own. Figure out how to get your own electricity. Because for some things, you're going to need electricity for, or you're going to have to learn how to do without. So I wanted to touch on a few of the items, learn how to get along without it. Now, based off of what I've got up here, what do you guys think are some of the things that we already listed as wants or needs? What do we need again? I heard heat, right? Warmth. Food. Light. That's a huge one, right? Cooking. Food, I'm just going to say cooking, because if you get me started on food storage, we'll go down a rabbit hole I'll never stop on, right? There's a lot of information there. All of this stuff, this is a broad stroke, because I'm not delving deep into any one subject. But so all of this stuff. So let's start off with cooking. What can you do if you don't have electricity? How can you cook your food? What would you guys do right now?
We were at a resort, the power went out, we cooked steak with 16 tea candles.
Wow, nice. I like that. I love the resiliency. Anybody else? What else do you have?
Charcoal.
Never grew up,
Is it propane? Okay, so you'll just have to light it with a match or something if, well, I guess, I won't go into the EMP situation yet. But, yeah, so that's a great way.
Charcoal.
Charcoal, that's a great one. So that's pretty close to over an open fire, right?
What if you have a gas stove?
Yeah. It depends on what situation we're talking about.
Yep.
Because in an earthquake, most likely
Yes.
gas
Break
isn't
the
gonna be
lines.
happening. And those gas lines are pressurized with compression stations that need electricity to pressurize that, right? So if that goes down, that gas is gonna stop flowing.
I think I've seen a solar cooker in Salt
Mm,
Lake
yes.
survival.
Yes, you have. Yep, and I didn't even get into that last time, and I have one. A solar oven that collects the rays from the sun and you can cook a turkey. I did it on one of my job sites just to see if I could. We left it there, and by the time we were ready to eat around 2, we had a cooked turkey. It was pretty cool.
The Vesta, I don't know if you've heard about that, but you can put, you know, those little canned heat that you, like, they keep food warm, you put that in there.
Canned heat, in case you can't hear in the back.
Yeah, it not only heats up a small space, but you can cook on top of it.
Yep.
So it's a huge both the heat and the cooking.
Yep. And one that I haven't heard yet, but I'm sure will come up. How about your wood burning stoves? You could cook right on top of those, right, if you didn't have power? In fact, I forgot my pans quite a few times because we used to set up these whole cabin tents, canvas tents, and we'd have a wood burning stove in there. When I forgot I've cooked steak right on the top of those things and just used them and greased them up, and it ends up working really well. And it became a thing. We didn't even use, skillets anymore. But I guess that could be gross to some people. But anyway, you can do it if you need to, right? So a few of the items that I have here, I just wanted to touch on as far as camping stuff. And so we've got different cookers, and I wanted to show this one. Have you guys seen something like this before? No? This is about the cheapest way that you could cook. This is from Walmart. I think for everything right here, you're looking at $25 or $30, and this will cook. It's kind of on a cheap budget. And this it's brand new. You see, I haven't even cooked on it yet because it stays in my food storage stuff. Even though I have all this stuff in my garage, if for some reason I needed to grab my food storage and leave, this is with all of that. Because most of my food storage stuff, I just need to add hot water to, And so I need to boil water. I've got a pot in my food storage stuff, and I've got a way to warm up water to do that. And this is a cheap, easy way. These are cheap. They're about $5 a piece. They're not? They're like 8?
At least 8 or 9.
Wow, okay. I'm out of touch because I have so many. At least I've got my own.
Does that have a name?
This?
At the top.
That's what I do too.
Let me see. It's a Coleman
Camping stove.
Perfect Flow stove, propane stove. That's all. And they've got them in the camping section on Walmart.
Can you hook them to a big tank or?
I don't know if they have the receiver for it, but I did want to talk about one thing. These little green canisters cost $5 to $8, depending on where you get them. And you can actually refill these with a 5-gallon propane tank that's pressurized. They make what's it called? An adapter valve that you put on top of the propane tank on the side, and it comes out and elbows up, and you screw this in upside down, and you can fill this for about 30 cents. And so you can fill your larger 5-gallon propanes and then refill them with this. Now, these aren't meant to be refilled. They're not like built for it. So after about 5 to 8 times of doing that, you'll start to get leaks because the threads will wear down. But for that, it's worth it. And then at that point, you can replace your little green canisters. But any Google search for propane adapter for filling little propanes will get you there.
You can buy refillable tanks too.
You can. Those that are refillable? Oh, cool. So those will last a lot longer.
I'm sorry, where do you store it safely when you're not using it?
This?
Yeah, you store it in your house or?
Yeah, so it comes apart and I break it all the way down. And these are really safe when they're not
Okay.
screwed on. And so this goes into a box with the bottom and they all just go together, but I don't store them set up and ready to go. Yeah, some of the other things, this is a Camp Chef. This is like if I'm cooking for 1,000 people, I don't know. Huge pot, you can boil water with one of these. But I also didn't want to bring my 2 or 3 other Camp Chefs. You guys all either have them or have seen them out in the parking lot flipping and making pancakes. It's a great way to cook if needed. You want all of these propane cookers generally to be done outside though. They can put off carbon monoxide and other things that can be dangerous for your health. And then one I wanted to touch on that's interesting that I got, and I always look for these at either DI or yard sales or anything like that. It's called a dual fuel. And it's just one of these kind of regular camp cookers. But the thing that I really like about it is it can run on white gas or it can run on actual gasoline from vehicles, which in an emergency situation you might have more of than a ton of white gas. If you're cooking on this for weeks at a time, you're probably going to run out of your back stock of white gas. And it's nice to have this, and you want to try to find the lead-free stuff to put into these. But this lantern is a dual fuel as well. And it's an older variety, the one that you have to pump and prime. And so people get scared of them, and you can pick them up for $5 because people don't want to use them anymore. Once you understand the principle behind them, you can pick them up really cheap, and you've got a great source of light or an ability to cook. So
Is white gas, does that store safely?
it stores longer than gasoline will. So gas, that's a problem with gasoline, it can go bad.
I've got a white gas backpacking stove that I've had since I was a kid, and I had some white gas in the garage for 10 years, and I was able to go start that little stove right up with it.
Yeah.
So it'll hold a long time.
The white gas does store a long time, and it's all situational. You know, if your temperature was different, maybe it wouldn't have, or whatever. But gas doesn't quite store that long. Now, there are things, additives you can put into gasoline or diesel to try to get them to store longer, but
Is it less flammable than gas or gasoline?
yeah, it's, people ask that about kerosene as well. I guess it's not as explosive as like gasoline, right? Kerosene gets kind of a bad rap in all the cowboy movies. These get shot, and what do? They just explode and fire goes everywhere. Have any of you ever tipped one of these over or seen, like in the cowboy shows, it's in the barn, this falls onto the hay, and then what happens? Suddenly the barn's gone. If these tip over, in all my experience, the kerosene will put the flame out.
Yeah.
Like, kerosene is not easy to actually light. It's like diesel. You know, it doesn't just flame up like gasoline does. But then, just a few other things that you could cook on in an improvised kind of situation. These are backpacking stoves. This is from Walmart. This is like $30 too. And, you know, people kind of look down on these, oh, it's Walmart. Because this is an MSR stove, and this is probably a couple $100. This is probably $100 and something right there. This is 20 or 30, and really the only difference is it's a little heavier and a little bigger. And I've used these a ton in our wilderness program, and they're wonderful, and you could cook on them, you could heat up water. If you're cooking for a full family, this is kind of small, and it might be difficult, and these aren't easy to come by, but if this is all you have, if you're a backpacker, you can use these to cook at your house. And then a few other items that I have up here. I wanted to talk about twig stoves. Have any of you ever used a twig stove? Yeah? So this is an actual brand called Solo brand, and you put something on top of this like that. You start a little fire down in here, and then you just feed this window twigs. So you have almost a never-ending supply of fuel if you take it out. And we ended up transitioning to these, and we call them hobo stoves for our youth in the wilderness. And these we allowed when they went on solos. So kids got to go and spend 24 hours alone. They weren't allowed to have open fires. If they made one of these and they worked, which kids got really inventive because they wanted fire on their solo. So this is just a paint can with a bean can and a tuna can right there. And you can, and this is actually a really good, it actually burns better than some of these other ones, like this one, just as straight fire. These double burn the smoke, so it'll suck the smoke back in and re-burn it. It's actually a really good design. The Solo Stove does the same, that's these extra holes you see. It does, you know, there's a whole science to fire. This is a twig stove as well, but then it also has an attachment on the top, this little thing, for liquid. So you can fill, you know, you can use alcohol or whatever, and you can light it on fire and warm up food with. And then this little guy is just kind of cool, more of a novelty than anything. It's called a Kelly pot, and it's like the shepherds and the game wardens in Scotland would use these. So you start the fire down here and feed it, and then they'd heat up their drink, their water in here, and then they'd use this, you know, to drink out of. It's just kind of fun. It's just an interesting thing, but just a way to also cook it if you wanted to. One thing I wanted to say about cooking on an open flame, because some of my friends just say, I don't need any of that stuff, I'll just cook on a fire. If the fire, you know, how long do you think your kitchen, you know, pots and pans will last on an open fire? A couple times probably, but if they're Teflon or any of those things, I mean, they're gonna start falling apart pretty quickly.
Is kerosene safe inside?
Kerosene is safe inside. Yep, I mean, there's always a fire threat, but like, it's not as dangerous as propane.
Doesn't put out
Yep.
carbon monoxide?
I don't know about how much. Slim?
I was just gonna say, you can also use, the little gel fuels, like the chafing, for like chafing dishes, those are great for indoors also.
Yeah. Yeah, most of these you probably wanna cook outdoors, but the kerosene I would be fine cooking indoors with.
Just a couple comments on the propane. It releases a lot of moisture. So if you're inside of like a smaller shed or a trailer or something, you're gonna let off a ton of moisture when you're releasing it. So I had a small camp out, we were in a metal container, and we got soaked because just the condensation of lighting off even one of those Mr. Buddy heaters, it collected on the roof of the metal shed, and then the wind going over the top froze it, and then in the morning it started raining on us inside of the container. Yeah. So you let off a lot of moisture when you burn propane inside. We learned the hard way.
Yeah. And that happens a lot with anything. If you're boiling, you're gonna let off a ton of that vapor. Even your breathing can cause that. Have any of you been camping and have the moisture drip on you just from your own breath? It's kind of nasty when you think about it. But yeah, that's a good observation. Okay, think Pioneers, they cooked on the open fires a lot. What did they use to cook with?
Cast iron.
Cast iron. Does anybody own any cast iron in here? Me too. It's kind of an obsession. Right? I've got an issue. If I see one, even though I have 17 pans already, my wife's like, you don't need another cast iron pan. What if the world comes to an end? I might. As I know it. The world as I know it, right? So anyway, I would look into that. If you don't have a Dutch oven or a cast iron skillet, I'd pick one up. You can find them at DI. You can go to yard sales. They're amazing. People just get rid of them. They don't know what their dad had it out in his garage because he's probably the most prepared person ever. And then the kids are just like, we got to get rid of all this stuff. And it's like $1 for a cast iron skillet.
And they don't know how to use them.
If you see that, just buy it. I'll pay you double what you paid for it and bring it to me. I just love them that much. But it's the whole reason I did this class so that I can say that. Anyway, okay, that's cooking. We got to move on. Heating homes. So some of carryover, right? Wood burning stoves are really good. Fireplaces, not as great because a lot of fireplaces have blowers on them right now, to help push that air. If you don't have electricity, most likely those blowers aren't going to work, and so you lose a lot of heat. But stoves are good. What other ways do you think you could heat a home? Or at least a room?
The gas fireplace won't work without electricity.
Depends. Some can, but almost all of those have blowers that push the air out. You might get some flame in there, but it's not doing the same thing like you would.
Is there a solar way to heat a home?
Yes, definitely. I mean, anything that you can run electricity with solar, you store it in a battery, you could heat your home with a plug-in heater. Now, there's a huge draw, you know, if you start talking how much, you know, electricity you're using. But I don't know, I mean, other than like, you know, during the day, walking out and feeling warm, like how to directly use solar other than with a battery bank, you know, to store that energy.
Online, they have ways that will show you with like a couple window panes and some of the, like the heating or the tubing for a dryer. You can actually build a solar heater that will pump in and it'll heat about one room.
You're right, I wasn't thinking about all
and
the
then
earth-ship stuff.
There's
that's possible.
also, these cute little stoves that you can use that same, gel fuel, the chafing fuel, that will heat like a 10 by 10 room. So if you just pack your family
Yeah,
into
that's-
there, you can do pretty good.
Thanks, Slim, that's great. In our wilderness program, we would use what we called super shelters. Has anybody ever heard of Morris Kohinski? He just barely died, but he taught survival up in Canada for a lot of years. And we would have kids group up in groups of 6, and we would do, this is when it's this time of year, like freezing and below freezing out in the West Desert. So we still had kids out in the wilderness even when it was freezing cold. And it gets a little bit scary when you think about trying to keep kids warm, right? When we started using the super shelter ideas, exactly what Slim said, there would be fire in the middle, and we would have you guys seen the military shelter halves? It was like 2 soldiers in the olden days would carry a half a tent each, and then they'd get together at night and button it together, and they'd both sleep in these canvas tents. They still make them, but we would buy them, and each kid would get a half a shelter, and he would set up the tent, and he'd have half a shelter, and the other half, we would put plastic over the front, the clear, see-through plastic. And that fire in the center, all the kids would ring that fire, and just the radiation from that fire would go in there, and we would put an emergency blanket along the back wall, and it would trap that heat, and it would get anywhere from 40 to 70 degrees in their tents, and they were able to do it all night long. And so if you applied those same type of principles to a house or whatever, it would definitely work, but kind of tangenting there, but it's very interesting.
Is there a better generator than another? Would you recommend generators?
Yes, thank you. You're helping me get to where I didn't get to in the first class, and I will get there. I'm gonna talk about some cool different generators, for sure. So, okay, we've got heating homes. There are different ways. Someone brought up, you can actually kind of heat a room with some clay pots and candles, and the clay takes that heat and will hold it and radiate the heat of that candle instead of the candle heat just going up and dissipating. It gets caught and becomes a little heater. And you can definitely keep a small space warm with that, or if you have multiples, you could heat a room with candles doing that. So, and there's a million ideas similar to that, but there are, because people were asking, in some apartments, they're not allowed to have stoves or anything like that. And so what could they do in an apartment to stay warm if they needed to? And we've been without power in the winter for 2 or 3 days. We had so much fun camping next to our wood-burning stove. All the kids got to, I mean, they thought it was the funnest thing in the world. And my wife's like, what is happening right now, you know?
Is that a special clay pot or just a clay pot?
Just a terracotta.
Like plants, you can use those. They make them specifically with certain holes so that there's air. If you use an actual terracotta pot that you plant a plant in, you need to keep it tipped up so that the air can get
They
in.
usually have holes.
I have some pictures if they want to see them.
Ooh, nice. I did have a presentation, by the way, which I lost last night at midnight, about lost my mind. So anyway, I did have some pictures to show some of this stuff, and if you want that presentation, when I find it wherever it got lost magically in this electronic world, I can send it to you if you want to put your email on the back of that roll over there. Did anybody not get the roll? Did everybody sign in? Oh, let me pass that over to you. Diane will remind me.
Sorry.
Did I do good, Diane?
Okay, good.
Okay. All right. Lighting. Lighting's a big one. Why do you think we might need light?
So you don't stub your toe in the footstool in the night.
So much stuff. In an emergency, just having some light helps keep me calm, helps kids feel calm. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you're probably gonna need to do in the nighttime, but if it's dark, you're kinda, without light. So, a few of the improvised ways that you can have light if you don't have a generator or something like that. You can do one of these, and these are bright. So this is just a propane light, and they use this filament. So if you do get these, make sure you have multiple filaments, because if those go down, you don't have anything. These are super bright, and they kind of sound like a jet taking off, especially if it's quiet around. It's just like, and they're bright, so they're nice. I personally, my favorite form of light, like when I'm camping, like at a gathering or something, I love these old lanterns, these storm lanterns. And these were like top technology at the time when these were coming out. This is a Dietz brand, and they're amazing. If you ever see a Dietz brand in anything, when you're out yard selling, buy it, I'll pay you double for it, whatever you paid for it. Anyway, so this is kerosene, and this is pennies. So kerosene, is gonna last a long time, and I bet I could leave this going for almost 2 days on a low flame, and it would just burn. So think how many hours you get out of that. It's a lot, 48. My math is correct. But that's not, it depends on the size of your reservoir and all of those things. But this is a great way. It does give off a little bit of the kerosene smell. My kids have learned, they know that means we're on an adventure. They smell that smell and they're like, we're gonna go camping. We're gonna do something fun. And this, the way they work is amazing. The way that this is a tube and it circulates the air. And if you walk outside with one of these and a huge gust of wind hits this, it doesn't go out. Or if you're carrying a candle or a different type of light, it can blow it out pretty easily. I already talked about this one, but it's a gas or whatever, but it's a primed. You have to pump this. If anybody wants to learn how to do that at some point, let me know. I'm happy. Because you can pick these up so cheap. Nobody wants to deal with priming them anymore. And there's, a lot of people are like, well, it won't even hold a prime. And all you need is a little leather washer that I'll give you for free. It's so simple once you understand how these work. They're worth every penny by far. And then you have all the battery operated devices. This is one of my newest favorite ones. It only made it one camp out with the young men, and then it was broken. They broke this when they were playing baseball in the mud. They stepped on it, but this can telescope up, really high. But that's really bright, and it's light in here. So on a camp out, you can go really high, it diffuses the light, but it lights up a whole campsite, You have a couple of these, and you can have a dance, or whatever you're doing. And it's wonderful. So there's a million options for lights with batteries.
Is that a battery?
It's got you've got to charge this. So now you can charge it in an off-grid situation, but you need to have photovoltaic, which is like solar or battery power to be able to charge it. And there's a million, all the headlamps, all the flashlights, all that stuff are battery operated. Remember, I'm not going into the realm of talking about EMP, which is electromagnetic pulse, which is like a nuclear bomb. As soon as you say EMP, people are like, you're a crazy person, right? But, EMPs can happen naturally. Solar flares, it happens all the time. People's electronics will go out. If a nuclear device is exploded in the atmosphere, really what's happening is it sends out that EMP, and anything that the light touches from that will just fry the electricity. And so, I won't get into all that, but that's, some of this stuff might not work if that's the case, if that's happened. But generally, you'll have some kind of battery, at least in the beginning of any situation, that you can use stuff like this. But so that's lighting. Going down any of these would just take forever. But food and refrigeration. Oh,
I just wanted to mention that there's solar lanterns and solar flashlights
Yeah.
also. We have a really nice little solar lantern that's just 2 round pieces and plastic that collapses, and you just set that in a window, and then at night you pop it up and it's pretty bright.
Yeah, even those cheap little garden lights. You know, I put them outside my tent when I'm camping that way, just so that people don't trip over my lines and all of that kind of stuff. And they lasted me 5 years, you know, and they just, you put them out and they light up. So there's a ton of stuff like that. There's the hand crank lights. Have you guys all seen those cool ones that you can do the radio, you crank them and you can get some light? And that's a type of generation, right? So if you remember, my first thing was learn how to get along without it. So this is all the stuff getting along without electricity. So creating your own. The number one thing I put was to stock up on batteries and how to keep your batteries alive. Which is only 10 minutes. I've done it again
How
sometime.
do you do that? Put it in the refrigerator?
Yeah, so that's a great, you know, batteries will last kind of a long, they have a good shelf life depending on the type of battery, and I won't get into like how they're made. The Harbor Freight ones are not as good as the more expensive ones, and it generally plays out with how long they last and the storage of those devices. But I always thought my grandma was weird because she kept her batteries is what she called them. Battery? I don't know, but she called them batteries, and they were always in her fridge. And I just thought, that is the weirdest thing ever. And now I'm like, she's a genius. Somehow she knew. I don't know. Did they teach that at some point? Anyway, but they can get condensation on them because of the chemicals that are in there. And so they actually say if you seal them in a bag and keep them in your refrigerator, that's the best way to store batteries. And I didn't know that for a long time. So luckily my wife lets me have my own downstairs fridge where I can do all my weird stuff, all my, you know, grape juice and things I create. She's like, you just keep it all downstairs, that's fine. So I've got batteries and seeds and all kinds of stuff in that fridge that she doesn't even touch. So, large batteries for vehicles, they're great. And you can use those if you don't have a deep cycle battery to store like solar energy. You can use old car batteries. But if you're storing them specifically for emergency preparedness purposes, the best way is to get them brand new and to store them dry. That means no acid has been put in them yet, which break down. They'll only store a certain number of years once they become wet with the battery acid. They won't hold a charge like they should.
Would an EMP disable that?
I think so. Oh, with them being dry?
Uh-huh.
I don't know. It's a good question. But I'm not an expert, by the way. I just like this stuff. I don't know everything. That's a great question. I need to find
It
that out.
depends on the type, because the new lithium batteries have an electronic circuit in the top of them.
That's
It's
the
called a
case.
BMS, and that will get toasted. But if you have an AGM or like a wet cellar, lead acid in the car, any of those are fine. So if you have an emergency, you could go gather up car batteries.
Because it's the electrical
Yeah, it's
stuff
just
that
biased,
gets
you're
fried.
running electrons from one side, but I wanted to comment on hers. Somebody had asked about heating with that battery, and you only have 1,200 usable watts in a battery. A regular room heater, if you go to plug it in, it's already drawn 1,500 watts, so you can only run like a plug-in heater for maybe 30 minutes if you're lucky.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
batteries are just a bad choice for heating, but great for lighting.
Yeah. And it makes me think of, we bought when I was running, you know, the youth, we bought a lodge up in the high Uintas, and we operated fully off the grid, and so we had a big solar array and a massive battery bank, and heaters were completely off limits. They're gonna suck your, you know, the energy like crazy, and do not let your kids play any of their gaming systems on a battery. Those things right now pull more energy than an iron plugged in. Just being plugged in, just sitting there not doing anything, they're pulling that much electricity. So, sorry you don't have to plug those things, but anyway, but up at the lodge, we had a whole bunch of little cabins, and every one of them had a kerosene heater in them, and nobody died. So that's how I know that they're okay to sleep in, because I'm not dead, and I've done it a lot. But the kerosene heaters, some of them are kind of big, but they're great, and they will heat up a whole area, and just like with the lanterns, they just sip that kerosene, and they'll burn a long time. Okay, solar. There's different, go ahead.
Back to refrigeration for 1 sec. It was a question for you. Do you know how deep of a hole in the ground you have? Say you can't get any power, because I know there's a certain constant temperature that people in the old days, they put food in the ground, like if you take a bucket, you know how deep of a hole you would need?
I don't know enough on that, to be honest, to really,
Probably below 30 inches.
Yeah, the
At
deeper
least
the
below
better.
30, but doesn't it get a little bit cooler the deeper you go to, I guess there's a limit,
Yeah, you get
I
to
don't
a
know much
constant
about that.
temperature below 30.
below 30?
Yeah. Most food preservation that I know of comes in the form of like dry curing meat and how to preserve eggs for months by using a crayon just to color on the outside to stop those pores from, all stuff that I feel like most people know, but that stuff will preserve for a long time. As far as keeping it cold, I don't exactly know. I mean, I know that there are some lakes that you can drop your food down in, and it's, I mean, up at Strawberry Reservoir, that water down in there is like 30-something degrees. And if you could keep almost anything cold, but, like they used to drop woolly mammoths. They found woolly mammoths in lakes where people would dive down and cut off chunks, and it would stay good for a long time. And so there's all kinds of stuff like that. But yeah, talking about food preservation is a huge topic that is really interesting to me, but I'm getting off track. So, generators. So we're going to talk about generators for a second. Have any of you ever set up or used or been around a wind generator that they use? So really, I mean, generating power, I mean, you've got what are they called? Hydroelectric. Water makes electricity, hydroelectric. They're using the motion of the water, just like the old mills, that would crush the flour because they'd always be next to a river, because that river's moving and causing energy, right? So you can do that with hydroelectric generators. You can do that with wind. It's the same idea. You put it in a windy place, it turns that turbine, and then it will create electricity. But with all of this stuff, generally you need to have a battery or a way to accept it. Because just like with solar, there's only a certain number of hours a day you're going to get light. And you want to harvest that energy as much as you can. An interesting thing, you can create your own bike generators for like $48. And I've got the plans for it actually in this book right here. If anybody's interested, I could send it to you. And it's a great way to work out and make some power, I guess. You ride the bike, it's a stationary bike, and you're using your energy to create energy, just like those hand crank, flashlights or whatever. Anyway, very interesting stuff. The new Ford Lightnings. I wasn't paid by Ford to talk about it, but they have an onboard generator that you can actually backfeed your house, right? Certain circuits or however you hook it up. There's all kinds of stuff. Jake can probably tell me. I work in an electrical place, but you don't want me actually doing any of the electrical work on the place, right? Jake, however, is a real electrician, so just be quiet if I say anything wrong. Just kidding. There are devices that you can actually now plug in to run specific circuits in your home with just a regular generator like this right here. So this is a knockoff of like a Honda generator. It's the Predator from Harbor Freight, and I am so impressed with that thing. For what I paid for it, I hook it up to a trailer and will run everything that I need it to run. And this can run quite a few circuits at your house. So if you get a lot of people want a full home generator, and when you see what the cost is to get a whole home generator with an ATS, an automatic transfer switch, which if the power goes off, it just keeps going. And generally, if you've got a lot of money, you may want that. Hospitals need it because if they lose their power, they don't want all those machines shutting off and possibly killing people. So it automatically gives you power. If you're willing to go without that, and you're willing to go out and start a generator, they make things that you can plug in. And all you have to do is plug into that, and it'll run specific things in your home. And so that's something that I can send out a link to that as well. It's a couple $100. So if you have a generator like this, it can do some stuff. Obviously, it's not going to run your whole house if you're cooking on the stove.
Run on gasoline?
Yeah, this is just a gasoline generator.
Put it outside?
Yep, it'll be outside where your panel is.
Is it noisy?
This one's actually really quiet. That's why I liked it. The Honda generators were really quiet. I've got a diesel generator that's a lot bigger that could run more of my house, but it's so loud. I mean, I need to take it 3 neighbors down and put it in their backyard so that I don't hear it. But anyway, Generators are a great way. Now, an EMP is gonna fry that, it's not gonna work, but short of that, this is a great way to generate electricity.
How much is that?
Does anybody know? I can't quite remember.
You mean an EMP could knock that out?
Oh, yeah. Anything with electronic equipment, your vehicles, anything that has fuel injection will not run if there's a solar flare or an EMP, any type of EMP. Older vehicles that have carburetors will run, but maybe your electrical, your lights won't work or something, but you can still drive and go.
The lights will still work, the radio won't.
Really?
Yeah.
Sounds like you know from experience.
I'm a mechanic and I have an old vehicle. Many
That's
old
why.
vehicles.
I thought maybe you'd been in an EMP, and I wanted to have a
No,
conversation with you about that.
I've looked into the EMP thing a little bit. You can build Farrier cages to shield, like say your generator from EMP, but there's a lot of argument on what
That's-
it takes to shield it, but.
Yep, the Faraday cage, right? Metal will block a lot of the stuff is what he's getting at, and there's ways to, like for me, the thought, I have so many books on all this stuff, I think I could survive about anything based off of my books. But man, hauling all those books around is not really convenient if I'm like in a disaster situation, and I thought if I had some kind of device or a reader to keep all those libraries on, that's something I would put in a Faraday cage and have it protected so that I always have access to all that information, right? As long as I can charge a phone. But anyway, I wasn't really gonna get into that because it does get contentious about what works and what doesn't work, and it's a whole thing. So I just wanted to wrap up. I'm out of time. We have a lot more information on our stake website. So www, I don't think I even need to say that anymore, right? Diane?
They're over there, you can take a copy of it, you need a new one.
Okay, so we've got packets, but the website is safelygathered.in, safelygathered.in, okay? On that is a bunch of our stake resources. We've got our level system, which is what Diane's talking about. We've got paper versions of that, but there's level 1, 2, and 3 that you guys can get certified in, and it's not really like so that we can fully pin a star on your hat and say that you did it. It's so that you have a starting place. Some people just become so overwhelmed as they're like, I've got to prepare, I don't know what to do. This level system is very generic and easy. Level 1 could take you maybe a week to do. Level 2 might be a little bit more, and then there's a level 3. Hi, how are you? Anyway, so there's a level system on there, and there's also a resource page where it links to a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, and we're going to continue to add to that resource page. I'll probably throw on there the name of the device that you can plug your generator into to run certain circuits in your house. So when your electrician comes out and wants to sell you on a whole home generator, you can say, I just want this thing. Do you remember what it's called, Jake, the device I'm talking about?
Transfer switch?
It's not a transfer switch. You do them manually, but this device specifically actually, anyway, the city has to come out and take off their meter. You place it between the meter and your panel, and that's what you plug into, and then you can choose. So it's just a really cool device, and it's only a couple of $100, and you guys could use one of these generators to help run your house. So, and it's a really simple way, and I'm gonna put that on the website.
Would you be willing to share your email address with us if we had questions?
Absolutely, you bet.
Tell us what it is.
Jake.thejourney@gmail.com. That's my real one. That's like my first Gmail, and that's the most real one I have, so. If you start spamming me, get in line, because there's a million people that spam me, so I'm not worried about it. Anyway, okay, and then the last thing I wanted to say is all of this stuff is cool, but it comes down to what you know, right? You can have thousands of dollars worth of gear, but you might not be home to access any of that stuff. So the more knowledge you can get, the better prepared you are. I would highly recommend camping, going out and having fun camping, but using as little electricity as possible to practice with. And even in our house and in the level system, one of the things that you need to do to get your certain level is turn off your power for a certain amount of time with your family and try to operate your house and see what you would do. I'm not saying go a whole week and lose all the food in your freezer or anything like that, but it's interesting because here I am, I love this stuff, And when we had to do it for real, I was like, holy cow, I need to add a bunch of stuff to because I have no way to, whatever it is. But you get what I'm saying. So, anyway, that's all I've got for you.
Where are the packets?
Will these be on the website, the videos? Was that our?
Yes, yep.
Let them know, you can always go back and hear this again.
Yeah, and I'm terrified now thinking about the fact that I've been filmed this whole time. I don't even like hearing myself here, let alone I'm on some video. But I do have some handouts for you guys.
Oh, they're on the table.
Oh, they're over there. So I have my rough agenda that I followed today, just to give you an idea. It's got our website on it. And then I also just printed these off for fun. And it's just kind of a cool project. There's a million of these online, but it came from my vintage old book called Nuclear War Survival Skills. I was leafing through, I was like, I haven't looked at this in forever. But it's just a way to make some candles that are really good for, and they're cheap and easy to make, and it's just kind of fun. So if you want one of these, come and grab this, and then the agenda's up here. So thank you.
Please, yes.